Hi everyone, my name is Jerry Yan. I'm a third-year PhD student from Cleveland State University. Thank you all for attending my talk today. The work that I will be presenting is about single and ensemble response of colloidal ellipsoids to a nearby AC electrode. This work was done by me and Dr. Aidan Rashidi under the guidance of Dr. Christopher Worth. First, let's talk about motivations. There's a lot of applications are related to colloidal systems, and many research groups that are working on the relevant colloidal system models, such as colloidal spheres and colloidal ellipsoids. Our lab is one of them, and we are studying colloids in a simplified environment and further extend the work to more complicated cases. The response of colloidal particles to an external field has been invested for many years. However, isotropic colloidal spheres form assemblies via anisotropic interaction that typically restrict structure to hexagonal arrays, which drives research interest to utilizing anisotropic particles to get a more complicated structure. The relevant work that we have done here is study the response of colloidal ellipsoids to a nearby electrode undergoing AC polarization. Herein, we studied how the response of colloids would be impacted by electric field strength, electric field frequency, and aspect ratio of colloidal particle. Specifically, as you can see from the title, we invested the colloid ellipsoids ensemble structure and the kinetics of colloidal ellipsoid aggregation. Now, please allow me to walk you through what we have accomplished so far. Let's start with the fabrication of colloidal ellipsoids. The method that we use here is called the monoaxial structuring technique. As you can see from the picture, we disperse polystyrene spherical particle into PVA films and further stretch the film to get ellipsoids, as shown in figure B and figure C. By stretching the film into different lengths, we got two types of colloid particles with different aspect ratio. With the colloidal suspension made from these films, we use a parallel plate electrode geometry to drive motion of colloids. This experiment setup was tested and has been used by my advisor, Dr. Christopher Worth, since 10 years ago. The fruit cell is made by sandwiching colloidal suspension with two pieces of conductive ITO slides and a 120 micrometer thick gasket. A potential stat was connected to ITO slides and provided the external electric field that has a direction normal to the electrode. A CCD camera and a 20x objective was used to record the video of particle motion. Here are three accelerated video samples from top view. Digital video microscopy was used to capture the response of ellipsoids to the nearby polarized electrode. Each video applied with a fixed potential. 3 potential drops was used here, 1.0, 1.5, and 2.0 volts. Meanwhile, in a single video, the frequency was tuned every minute to ramp up from 25 Hz to 3000 Hz and then ramp down to 25 Hz, which resulted in 17 conditions in total, suggesting that one video is exactly 17 minutes long. As you can see from figure A to figure D, the average cluster projected area was measured throughout the video. It equals to the total cluster projected area divided by the number of objects in the view. If you look at figure A to figure B or figure C to figure D, you can find that particles attracted to each other will result in an increase in the average cluster projected area as a function of time, while repairing particles will be measured to have a decrease in the average cluster projected area as a function of time. And see from figure B to figure C. Here are the results for spherical particles. Figure A shows how the scaled cluster size changes over time. The scaled cluster size was defined as a quotient of dynamic average cluster projected area and the initial average cluster projected area. The scaled cluster size was measured to determine whether particles aggregated or separated at a given electric field condition. The slope of the dynamic cluster size is an indicator of this behavior, which results from the net electrokinetic mediated hydrodynamic force felt by individual particles in the ensemble. The particles experience aggregation in a region where the scaled cluster size is greater than 1 and the slope is positive, and experience separation when the scaled cluster size is equal to 1 or the slope is negative. The data from figure A were used to formulate a structure diagram in the figure B. The dashed line suggests at where the ensemble behavior changes, meaning there is a critical frequency experienced by the spherical particle. From figure B, we could tell how ensemble behavior for aggregating condition depended on the electric field strength. There was a shift in the critical frequency when the potential reached 2.0, suggesting the critical frequency would increase as the applied electric field strength increase. Also, you may have noticed figure B is symmetric, suggesting the ramp of tuning frequency did not change the critical frequencies. Unlike spherical particles, low aspect ratio ellipsoids experience hysteretic regimes of aggregation and separation. In figure B, you could easily find there was a hysteresis in the critical frequency. The presence of the critical frequency between 300 Hz to 500 Hz for all electric field strengths when ramping up the frequency, but the critical frequency would change to somewhere between 1000 and 500 Hz when ramping down the frequency, which also indicate low aspect ratio ellipsoids has a constant and larger critical frequency as compared to that of sphere. Another thing that was special about low aspect ratio ellipsoids was the long axis aligned with the direction of the electric field at certain frequencies. The evidence could be found in the figure A at times between 8 minutes and 10 minutes. The scaled cluster size decrease below 1 is a consequence of a decrease in the projected area of ellipsoids, which indicate the ellipsoids stood up, as you can see from the figure at the bottom right. A standing ellipsoid will have a smaller circular projected area as compared to a laying ellipsoid at the elliptical projected area. In addition, low aspect ratio ellipsoids display another hysteresis in the frequency over which low aspect ratio ellipsoids stood up. From figure A, you can see ellipsoids are aligned at a frequency of 3000 Hz when ramping up in frequency, but did not relax to the laying status until ramping down to the applied frequency to 500 Hz. This behavior is a consequence of the balance between stochastic Brownian motion, Brownian rotation, hindered rotation mobility, and the electric field mediated dipole torque. Besides, it is likely a partial consequence of the rotation diffusion time for the particle being similar to that of electric field time step. High aspect ratio ellipsoids experience trend in response to the nearby electrode, similar to that of low aspect ratio ellipsoids. The primary difference between low aspect ratio and high aspect ratio ellipsoids was in the presence of a standing status. High aspect ratio ellipsoids did not align for any condition that we tested here. This supports the hypothesis that hysteresis is a consequence of the balance between rotational relaxation and hindered mobility. The induced dipole torque was insufficient to overcome hindered rotation mobility to align high aspect ratio ellipsoids in the direction of the electric field at these conditions. Alignment of low aspect ratio ellipsoids in the direction of electric field could potentially be used for fixing colloidal ellipsoid at orientations that typically would be energetically inaccessible in the absence of an AC electric field. In figure A and figure D, colloidal particles are the orientations that their long axis is roughly parallel to the substrate before the application of the AC electric field. Once the electric field induced standing, like was shown in figure B, Dr. Aidan Rashidi found out by applying a DC offset greater than 2.0 volts. The sticking status could be achieved, just like what you can see from figure C and figure E. This was a result of induced force has overcome the electrostatic repulsion between the electrode, substrate, and the particle. On the right side of the slide is a video that demonstrates this method. Waiting a finite amount of time between switching off the field allows for the ellipsoids to relax to orientations that are intermediate between perpendicular and parallel to the electrode substrate. Our group is specifically interested in measuring KT scale colloidal interaction of anisotropic particles by using total internal reflection microscopy. And we are collecting light scattering data from anisotropic particles with different orientations. Being able to control the orientation of ellipsoids and in energetically unfavorable position will significantly enrich our database. Herein, we quantitatively investigated the kinetics of aggregation. The experiment setup used the same as before. Each video applied with a fixed potential and a fixed electric field frequency. 3 different potentials and 6 different frequencies was used here. The video was about 1 minute long, with the first 15 seconds of no electric field apply, and the rest 45 seconds of AC electric field application. We obtained a quantitative description of aggregation kinetics by treating the process with the framework of a chemical reaction and measured a rate constant associated with the singlet loss. Our primary motivation is to determine whether there was an impact of aspect ratio on the rate constant for aggregation in response to an AC electric field. The rate constant was equated with a short-term loss of singlet in our experiment starting from monodispersed conditions, as you can see from figure E. This treatment is appropriate for our experiment, both because the short-term loss of singlets dominates the aggregation process and there's no breakup of cluster once formed. In figure E to figure H, this representative picture showed only the remaining singlet ellipsoids as a function of time in response to an AC electric field. When only considering singlet loss to cluster without cluster breakup, the singlet loss rate is given by the equation on the right side. And by integration, we got the final equation. Plotting the right-hand side of the final equation versus time, you will get a straight line with a slope equal to the rate constant Ke. Here are 3 figures that summarize the rate constant for all systems at varying frequency and different fixed electric field strength. Figure A was obtained from 1.0 volts, figure B from 1.5 volts, and C from 2.0 volts. From these figures, you can see all systems responded in quantitative the same way. The rate constant for aggregation grew as the frequency increased from 25 Hz, reached a maximum, and then start to decrease as the frequency was increased to region where particle began to experience the separation. Although the quantitative behavior was the same, the magnitude of the rate constant increased as a function of the nominal electric field strength. This data suggests there's no strong dependence of particle shape on the aggregation rate constant at these conditions. Conclusions. First, the ramp of tuning frequency induced a hysteretic behavior in aggregation and separation for colloidal ellipsoids. Second, only the low aspect ratio ellipsoids aligned with the direction of electric field and some conditions. Third, long-lasting deposition of ellipsoid in energetically unfavorable orientations could be achieved and further contribute to developing total internal reflection microscopy. Fourth, the aggregation rate of ellipsoids in response to an AC electric field showed the same quantitative behavior, regardless of aspect ratio. Last, acknowledgement. I'm truly grateful for all the support that I received from the Worth Lab at Case Western Reserve University and Cleveland State University and NSF. Again, I would like to thank Dr. Aidan Rashidi and Dr. Christopher Worth for their contribution and guidance. As for the audience, thank you so much for your time today. If you have any question, I'm ready to answer.